Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. You're welcome to the launch of the Nigeria Security Situation Analysis Report. My name is Ken Maduabu. I'm a Senior Policy Research Analyst at Nextier. This report is based on tracked data from the Nextier Violent Conflict Database. The period under review in the report is from January 2021 to June 2022. Nextier is a multi-competency public service advisory firm. We are involved in multiple areas from security, peace, development, to power and energy issues, to public sector issues. You'll probably get to hear more during the opening remarks. So very quickly, I would like to run us through the agenda we have for today. Okay, first we have an opening remarks, and then we go into the 20 minutes presentation on the report on selected key areas in the report. We also have some video coverage of issues, security issues in Nigeria that gives us more perspective to the subject matters that we'll be discussing today. And we go into the first section. The first session is Banditry and Terrorism, what are we missing? We have selected very key people working in this space that can, fully talk about issues in that space. And then we have time for audience participation, which includes both our colleagues here and then participants online. Then we will have another session. The session we cover achieving security stability and secure public spaces in Nigeria. We have also carefully selected another round of panelists for that section. And then there will also be audience participation, closing remarks, and networking and refreshments at the end. Quickly on the house rules, behind you by the right-hand side, it's the restroom in case you want to use the convenience. We have two exits once you go to the first one is at the first floor and one is at the ground floor. So in event of any emergency, that is the way to follow. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Ndubisi Nwokolo to make his opening remarks. Dr. Nwokolo is the partner and chief executive of Nextier SPD. Please, may we put our hands together while Dr. Nwokolo comes on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the entire Nextier team, we want to welcome you all to the report presentation on Nigerian security situation analysis. Nextier is an international development firm. Like Ken said, we have business interest in the power sector, public sector governance reform, health, and of course, security, peace, and development. Incidentally, the event of today is being organized by Nextier SPD, which is a business arm of Nextier that focuses on area of security, peace, and development. So why are we doing what we're doing today? Of course, we all know that the last 10 years in the country, we've been experiencing one form of insecurity, violent conflict or the other. So as an organization that prides itself with the idea that we want to leave this world better than we met it. So we felt that developing a database that tracks violent conflict in the country will help us to do a couple of things. One, it will help us to start being predictive about what is happening. It will help us to understand the pattern and trends of this violent conflict. It will help us at least to start deepening our early warning mechanism. Very importantly, it will help us to start developing strategies on how to deal with this. For instance, if our military strategy is working, what about economic strategy? What about political strategy? For instance, I keep telling people I'm somebody who loves political way of dealing with issues, especially things like political settlement. Going the political route will help us to solve the issue. So what we've done since 2020 is that we developed a database that uses secondary data. We are using traditional newspaper reports, TV, and radio to build a database that has taken 7 major violent conflict patterns in Nigeria. And we've been able to build that till date. But what we'll do today is to take from 2021 to June this year. So we'll be looking at 18 months of what has happened in the country. So we'll be looking at issues like banditry, we'll be looking at issues like terrorism, maritime piracy, cultism, communal clashes. We'll be looking at issues like secession agitation. And of course, we'll be looking at issues like farmer-herder conflict. So we've been able to done this 18 months intensive data build-up. So that's what we'll be doing today. Now, it's equally important for us to understand that for us to go deep down and understand this thing, we are going to show some videos. And we've been able to, like Kenneth said, select a panel of experts who will, based on the video, based on the presentation we had, make some valuable input, because we are not here to frighten anybody about numbers of deaths. We are here to see what come out from the audience sitting here, put it in our policy. Some of us are either decision makers in wherever we're in. Some of the things that will come out here, we'll go home with it, we'll be able to use it to do what we're doing. So apart from the audience who will be in the room, we're going to have audience online. They will make their own contribution. All these we'll put together. We'll come up with a policy brief on today's meeting, which we'll share with all the stakeholders to continue to find a way to protect our country. And with this, I'll say thank you and enjoy your day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nwokolo, for that succinct opening remarks. He has pretty much summarized why we are here today and why we are in this room, basically. Nigeria's security crisis is a conversation for all. And like he said, we are not pushing out the data to frighten anyone. We just want to give it a perspective so that we can now talk about responses or brainstorm solutions to mitigating them. Based on that, I would like to invite Charles Asiebu. Charles is a policy research analyst at Nextier. For a couple of months, running into years, he has been working on the database. So Charles will take about 20 minutes to walk us through the reports and information in it. From there, we'll take it on. Please, a round of applause as we invite Charles.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. Thank you all for joining us today. I'll, in the next 20 minutes, be running us through some of the findings in the report. So specifically, I tried to do a comparison of our findings in 2021, this first 6 months of 2021, and then the first 6 months of 2022. That is January to June 2021 and January to June 2022. So if you permit me, I would love to share my screen. Okay. So I'll be talking briefly about the database, and then I'll go ahead to talk about some of our findings. So our database is called the Nextier Violent Conflict Database, and it tracks violent conflict incidents from the community to local government to states and then regional levels in Nigeria. It records violent deaths, injuries, kidnaps, and we extrapolate data from traditional newspapers and TVs in Nigeria. The database aims to detail insights in violent conflicts around Nigeria to provide research, policy advocacy, development, and security. We leverage our vast media sources to triangulate this data in cases where we cannot confirm incidents that we tracked. We simply reach out to our very vast media sources around the country to triangulate and be sure about our data. So some of the conflict types include communal clash, group conflict, terrorism, maritime piracy, civil unrest, banditry, extrajudicial killings, armed robbery, farmer-herder conflict, cultism, domestic violence, and militancy. Okay, so between January to June 2021 and January to June 2022, what changed? So you can see the two charts. We tried to put them side by side. I don't know if we can exit or can minimize the video so that it's clearer. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So we tried to put them side by side. January 2021 to June 2021, January 2022 to June 2022. And if you can see, from January 2021 to June 2021, we recorded the incidents and deaths caused by banditry. And from our findings, we saw that there was a spike or increased number of attacks and killings in 2022 from 2021. Averagely, in 2021, we recorded at least 33 incidents every month, averagely. While in 2022, we recorded an average of at least 64, showing an increase in the number of incidents. And then in the number of deaths, averagely every month, we recorded 204 deaths every month in 2021, in the first 6 months. And then we recorded an average of 369 deaths in 2022. So we have a breakdown of how and where these attacks happened or clashes and the number of deaths. We trace them down to the community level, to the local government, to the state, and then regional. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'll be limiting it to the regional level. When the full document is sent to our emails, we can digest and see how far and see the spread of conflicts. Okay, so as you can see, in 2021, we had 84 deaths in the Northwest. That is the hotspot of bandit attacks and bandit incidents. And you can see it is an increase in 2022 where we had 1,083 deaths in the Northwest. It's a far departure from what was obtainable in 2021, showing that there was an increase. So if you go down into our database or the full report, some states like Niger, you see Niger State, Kaduna, and the rest, you see where you have not thousands or not a number of people, like increased number of deaths and incidents. For example, in Mariga in Niger State, in one of the bandit attacks, about 100 people were killed in 2022. That's how bad it is. So we try to also break it down to look at the number of incidents. While in the Northwest in 2021, we recorded 133 incidents. We recorded 187 in the Northwest in 2022. So you can see also that in the 2022, there was an increased spate of attacks in the Northwest and North Central. Okay, so this is terrorism also. Averagely, we recorded about 3 incidents every month in 2021. But in 2022, we recorded an average of at least 10 incidents every month. And then while we recorded 29 deaths averagely in 2021, we recorded at least 97 in 2022. By region, in 2021, we recorded most of the deaths in the Northeast. And then in 2022, it spread across to North Central, Northwest, and then the Northeast. As you can see, the Northeast also recorded the highest deaths. When you compare it to what was obtainable in 2021, you see a far departure, you see an increase in the number of deaths. The same thing also happened in the number of attacks and clashes. So we also capture secessionist struggle that is happening around the Southeast, South, and Southwest areas. Averagely, in 2021, we recorded 16 incidents every month from January to June 2021. However, in 2022, we recorded at least 49 incidents. While we also recorded 39 deaths averagely in 2021, we recorded 74 deaths every month. It's not very encouraging. So we also try to look at the regions. Of course, the Southeast had the highest number of deaths. And then you see the Southwest and South. In the Southeast, in Anambra State, for example, in 2022, several local governments were under siege. Local governments like Ihiala, Urumba North, South, and Aguata. Then we went down to also look at the incidents by region. Of course, the Southeast is also leading with the highest number of incidents. In 2021, we recorded 52 in the first 6 months for the Southeast. And then in 2022, we recorded 156 incidents. And then we also did record some incidents and attacks, deaths in farmer header related issues around the country. So from our findings, we were able to see that there are crisis types that are dominant in certain regions, while there are others that are spread across the country. For example, farmer header, you get to see the crisis, number of attacks and deaths almost all over the country. And you can see that the North Central is the worst hit. In states like Plateau, Benue, you get to see attacks, ongoing attacks, and concluding attacks in local governments like Ancha, Bassa, and the rest. So we recorded a decline in 2022 in the North Central. From 144 that was obtainable in 2021, we recorded 77 in 2022. And then we tried to look at the number of incidents by region. You can see the North Central, Southwest, South, Northwest. It looks like the trend continued in the same manner. And then we also looked at extrajudicial killing. I understand I have just 20 minutes, so I'll just be a bit fast. We looked at extrajudicial killing. We recorded an increase in attacks and deaths in 2022 when you compare it to 2021, which shows that there's still a lot of problems to solve in our space, security space. So in 2021, 2022, we saw an increase in number of deaths. We saw an increase in deaths in 2021, and then a reduction in 2022. If you see the charts in 2021, you see that the North Central had about 84. That 84 came from one solid attack by the security forces. It happened in Konshisha, Benue State, where villagers, about 70 of them were killed after it was reported that they killed 11 soldiers. The soldiers went ahead to destroy the community, and it was reported that about 70 people were killed, and that's why you can see that spike of 84. So we also saw that extrajudicial killing by region. We had more incidents in the southeast and the southwest. If you dig down into our data, it was as a result of allegation of extrajudicial killing on security forces against the so-called IPOB protesters and then the Yoruba Nation protesters in 2022. And then we also looked at cultism. We saw an increase in 2022 from what was obtainable in 2021. In the South zone, we recorded more deaths. In South, we recorded 14 deaths in 2021, but you can see that increased to about 38 in 2022. And then you can also see the number of incidents, South. While we had more clashes in the Southwest in 2022, we had more clashes in the South in both clashes and attacks in 2021. So our next steps as an organization is to, one, host our database on our official website for public use, for research purposes, for advisory purposes, for policymakers to be able to access data and use it to make actionable decisions. And we also hope to expand our database to include issues around climate variability and food insecurity. We plan to deploy data officers across 36 states of Nigeria who will be our field agents. Whenever there are incidents of violence, they could go to confirm, take videos, get interviews, and back to make our data the most robust data in Africa. So we intend to extend our tracking to West Africa, not just Nigeria, and then expand to Africa. It's in our culture to deliver on whatever was said to do. So we also intend to collaborate with partners who are willing to use our database for the several purposes, for research, for advisory, to make better decisions. And thank you. Thank you very much. But before that, I'd like to just show us, I talked about hosting the database on our website for public use. I just want to show us an example of what I mean. So if you permit me. Okay. So it's still under works. Okay. So this is what I mean. You can access our website when we are fully ready. You can sort by crisis types. You see all the crisis types, you sort by what you're looking for, and the figure generates automatically by LGA, by state, by region, by community and state. And we're also working to embed communities across Nigeria. So the beauty about this, when it is ready, is that it will be real time. As we are tracking and updating, you get it real time. You see the numbers change real time, and you get the most updated database. And while our style is beautiful, is because we compare notes with other databases across the world, ACLED, Center for Council on Foreign Relations, SBM. So we look at what they have done and use it to do better and become better than them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charles. I wonder how you were able to, walk around this data without feeling depressed. Like we said, we are not here to frighten you with the data, but it's our position that reliable data should inform policy responses to Nigeria's armed conflict hotbeds. Charles has been able to show us briefly what the report and the database looks like. And we also know that it's a work in progress. There's always room to, better the quality of the report and the database. We have plans to share the reports with the participants and a wider audience. And we also have plans to utilize the information from the database in mitigating or in responding to Nigeria's violent conflicts. Like I said earlier in my opening, we have 2 video clip rounds. First video clip round will preempt the first session, and I think it's ready to play. So let's take about 5 minutes to watch and ponder on the video. Thank you, guys.
Banditry and terrorism. What are we missing? In recent years, residents in Nigeria's northwest and north-central zones have experienced rising levels of banditry. Rural areas in the affected regions have become bandits' paradise, despite reports of security measures. Also, Nigeria is waging a 12-year war against terrorists. Nextier Violent Conflict Database shows that there were 554 bandit incidents and 4,016 deaths between January 2021 and June 2022. In addition, 125 terrorism incidents led to 1,040 deaths between January 2021 and June 2022. Given the scale and pattern of violent attacks by bandits, several reports have alluded that bandits and terrorists are colluding to perpetrate violence. This led to a call for bandits' classification as terrorists. To this end, a Nigerian court in 2021 outlawed some bandit groups' activities and declared their acts of terrorism, resulting in improved rates on criminal groups. Yet, the spate of attacks has continued to rise in these regions. What are we missing?
That was quite brief. Apparently we can spend the rest of the week talking about issues in Nigeria's security space, but for want of time, we just keep touching on quite a lot of them. Next on this session this evening or this afternoon is to now jump right into the first session of discussions for today, and that is banditry and terrorism. What are we missing? I think everyone in the room, both physically and virtually, we agree on the rising crisis around banditry and terrorism in Nigeria, and it is always a topical issue in recent years. I apologize now, you'll be seeing much of my face for this afternoon. I will be moderating the session for banditry and terrorism. What are we missing? So let's take a few moments to check our mics. I think they're already set. While that is happening, allow me to introduce the panelists. Like I said, we've carefully selected panelists for this session, and I'll go right ahead to introduce them. In no particular order, please, a round of applause for Hajia Fatima Kassina. She's our first panelist, as I am mentioning, in no particular order. Hajia Fatima Kassina is the head legislative liaison, Peace and Security, Nigeria's Governors Forum. So apparently, Hajia is going to be giving us a perspective from that side of the space. Moving on, I would like to welcome Professor Ikenna Alumona. Professor Alumona is the Professor of Political Science, Chukwuemeka Odimegwu Ojukwu University, Anambra State. Yeah. Please, we can encourage them more by clapping more, please. Last but not the least is Tarila McLean Ebiede. A round of applause for Tarila. Tarila identifies as a political scientist working in the field of peace research in Nigeria, South Sudan, Kenya, and Cote d'Ivoire. He is a co-founder of Conflict Research Network West Africa, a knowledge platform for researchers and policymakers in the field of peace building, conflict. Like I said, we've carefully selected this panel and we look forward to fruitful discussions. Please, dear panelists, kindly make it to the stage so we can begin. Okay. I apologize again. You're going to be seeing my face more often. We already know the situation of banditry and terrorism in Nigeria. We have seen the transition of banditry to rural, armed actors, to people involving in raiding communities, large-scale kidnapping. And we also seen attacks on state infrastructure, on security formations. We have also, for the last 12 years, witnessed insurgency in Northeast Nigeria that has spread to the Lake Chad Basin countries. And in more recent times, we have seen some sort of collaboration or partnership between what we refer as bandits in the parts of the North Central and parts of the Northwest, collaborating with insurgents in the Northeast. So that begs the question, and that informed the idea of this panel: banditry and terrorism, what are we missing? So we'll just jump right into the conversation. Basically, the responses might be coming from the perspective of the person or from the, the space side of the space that they, are coming from. Professor Alumona, pleasure to have you here. So I would like to start. What do you think are the scholarly approaches to better understand the evolving dynamics of banditry in Nigeria? I mean, you are an academic, so you probably shed some light on that.
The issue of banditry and terrorism has come to occupy the political space for some time. But if we look at it, we find out that, yes, conceptually banditry and terrorism are not the same, but the way they're operating in Nigeria, we have come to see that the two of them is coming together, that it has become somehow difficult to find a dividing line. So there are theoretical approaches that have been there. We have the failed state thesis. We have the ungoverned spaces argument. We also have the social banditry thesis. But for me, if we must understand this because of the link between banditry and terrorism, I think the best scholarly approach to use is the crime-terror nexus. Whether as bandits or as terrorists, all of them are all involved or engaged to cause terror. And these are all actions that are outlawed and sanctioned by the states. So both bandits and terrorists in our context are involved in that crime-terror nexus. We have, if we look at what is happening, you see that there is a convergence in their actions. they do adopt similar approaches and also form alliances to carry out their activities. So the crime terror nexus for me provides a good analytical framework for understanding banditry in Nigeria, because the banditry we find in Nigeria, if I may say, is conceptually different from what you find it out, what is outside in other places. Because ordinarily, a bandit is not supposed to use the kind of network we find them using in Nigeria. But why is it so in Nigeria? Is because there is a convergence between banditry and terrorism. At a point, they will masquerade as bandits. At another point, they will masquerade as terrorists. But the end game, whichever way you want to look at it, is that the objective is to inflict terror. And both is also outlined by the state. So I will say that the crime terror nexus provides a good analytical approach for that.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that brilliant perspective. Hajia, I understand that you are more or less in charge of peace and security for the Nigeria's Governors Forum. I would like to know, states in Northwest and Northeast are, as we have mentioned, are experiencing banditry and terrorism, respectively. Coming from the peace and inclusive initiative perspective of the Nigerian Governors Forum, what are the sustainable peace mechanisms that the forum and the affected states are developing to solve the situation?
Thank you very much for that introduction, for your question. I think a good place to start is to understand what's happening as far as banditry and terrorism is concerned. I'd like to agree with what one of the panelists has already said previously, that we are witnessing a convergence between banditry and terrorism in the country. And I would like to also highlight that I think part of the reason why this is happening is because of a distinct socioeconomic crisis that we're also having in the country. Like, the security crisis is tied to the economic crisis we're facing. And in order to solve the deepening security crisis we're having in the country, we also have to look at ways to solve the economic crisis in the country. And in view of doing that, what the forum is doing as a policy hub, since we're not operational, we're a policy hub, what we're trying to do is offer and create a space for advocacy and dialogue amongst all the key decision makers and stakeholders in the space, basically. And to bring an early signal awareness to the stakeholders and put them in a position where they can make key decisions. I think part of the problem that we're having is that there's a breakdown of communication between the security agencies and the states. And so that breakdown needs to be addressed, and there needs to be more cohesion in their communication. And I think also more work needs to be done in terms of identifying the cause of these terrorist and banditry issues that were happening. Because I think that everybody is experiencing the effects of the terror that we're going through. And in opposed to being problem-oriented, I would like to take a more solution-oriented approach. Everybody can feel the problems, we're all living it. Everybody has a member of their family that has either gone through kidnapping or banditry or armed robbery in the country. And I think we need to take more time to focus, why is this happening? And I think the reason why this is happening is because of basic socioeconomic unrest and dissatisfaction in the country. And by that I mean to look at issues of food security, economic insecurity, educational insecurity. I mean, we're even still facing infrastructural insecurity in the country. The roads are not good. We're having issues with our infrastructure. This means we're having issues with access. That's what the issues with access means we'll now have issues with representation, because the people that need to be represented are having difficulty accessing key decision makers, both figuratively and literally. So, I mean, from the forum's point of view, what we're doing is trying to make sure representation is key. By representation, I mean both state and non-state actors. To first identify what the cause, the root issues of their problems are, and then secondly, put a dialogue, a forum together where there's a space where a consensus platform where everybody can come together, identify these issues, agree with solutions for these issues, and then put together next steps as soon as possible, because the issues are quite urgent. And I think the problem we're having is the time from one agency to the next agency, from one decision maker to the next decision maker before things are actually done. So, there needs to be a platform for dialogue and communication that's cohesive from federal and state, and also represents non-state actors who are the victims, and also members of the criminality, in terms of identifying what their goals are, because it's still not clear what their goals are, which is why people are having difficulty identifying the difference between banditry and terrorism, because their actual goals are still not clear. All we know is that people, and I think they themselves are not, are having difficulty articulating what their problem is, and what the dissatisfaction is. And the dissatisfaction is socioeconomic. And in most cases, in the human case, in the humanitarian case, when people are dissatisfied or experiencing unhappiness, they tend to fall on what's familiar. In Nigeria and across the world, what's most familiar is religion. Religion is the vocabulary that people can communicate and express themselves best with, which is why you see some of the problems deteriorating and diverging into religious problems, but it's not really religious problems, it's socioeconomic. Their issues is lack of water, lack of food, lack of employment, lack of light, lack of good roads, education, and infrastructure, and jobs once after you've come out of the education problem. We have a huge number of unemployment in the country, and this unemployment rate is directly tied to security. In order to address security in the country, we need to address unemployment and all the other socioeconomic items that fall on the list. And we're working very hard on that to sensitize our principals and come together and create some kind of communication and network platform. And I'd like to also commend you for the work that you're doing. Dialogues and open forums like this are key in order to get the message out and also to receive information and work together as a team and try to see if we can get a solution to this problem we're facing in the country.
Thank you so much. So I picked three things from. First of all, security is tied to quite a lot of other issues: economic issues, cultural issues, lack of representation issues.
Yes.
And that's more like a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So those economic type of issues are affecting security, and then security is also in turn impacting on them. Yeah. I also liked that you touched on quite a holistic approach. Talked on the combative side. I had more of the non-combative measures that you think should be in place.
Yes.
Yeah, that's quite. And I also like that you agreed with Professor Alumona on the convergence between bandits and terrorists. So I think on that note, I would like to shoot a question to Tarila. Tarila, given that we are witnessing some type of what you call partnership between bandits and insurgency in Nigeria, should non-combative strategies still treat them as isolated armed conflicts, or will a holistic approach work?
I'll join the colleagues to congratulate you on the wonderful work that you're doing here at Nextier. First of all, in reflecting on these issues, it's important to understand what we're talking about, and Professor Lumona has really explained this clearly, and also the colleague from the Governors Forum also have really provided a broad context. However, it's also important to understand what is at play, whether or not, in my view, I do not think it's an either or situation. I think that we need to develop a whole of society, like an holistic approach to understanding and resolving or responding to these issues. Again, when you say whether we should use a non-combative approach to respond to banditry or even terrorism, we are assuming that we cannot build peace in context of active violence. Actually, with the nature of conflicts these days, where the conflicts are very complex, they are ongoing. We've gone beyond the time where there's a clear timing and sequencing of peace building. Actually, peace building can be introduced at any time in a conflict cycle. So, and when we are speaking of peace building, we are talking mainly on non-combative approaches, non-kinetic say these days in Nigeria, non-kinetic approaches to conflict. And within the Nigerian policy community, you see that peace-building language is now very common. DDR is now, everybody in Nigeria is talking about DDR. Everybody in Nigeria is talking about reintegration or IDP resettlement and things like this. But in non-combative approaches, one thing, and I am really glad that the Governors Forum representative talked about that, one thing that we need to really integrate into the process is dialogue, multi-level, multi-stakeholder dialogue that don't only focus on elites, but also focus on people who are affected by conflict and also focus on perpetrators. It's often said that war is politics in other form, but again, peace building itself is politics. Peace building is a political process. And if peace building is a political process, the logic of war, the logic of conflict that we see, which is in itself a logic of politics, a particular form of politics, there's a risk that that logic can be reflected or can be absorbed into the non-combative, that in this sense, peace building process. And as such, reinforcing the fault lines of conflicts, the fault lines that were created by conflicts. So in reflecting on non-combative approaches, it's important that we maintain it, that the Nigerian political elites and government actors, development partners maintain non-combative approaches, but in doing this, should be aware and not reinforce the fault lines of conflict, the fault lines, the divisions, the logic of power that sustains conflict or that are created by conflict, but rather that these non-combative processes, this building process should seek to generate new social contracts in communities, should seek to build new social cohesion, should seek to heal the wounds of communities, address issues of women, address issues of children who are displaced, of traditional institutions that have been completely destroyed as a result of conflict, and restore a social order that is that reflects the values of a civilized, functional society.
I hear quite interesting things. I hear about conflict sensitivity. I hear about humanitarianism. I hear about social inclusion. I hear about multi-stakeholder approach to capture the different groups that are affected or are likely to be affected by, this crisis. Still on you anyway. I know you've kind of touched on what the holistic approach will look like. I would have wanted to, know more in detail what this holistic approach can also entail, or how can it work, considering that banditry, many might argue, is a different type of armed conflict from the terrorism or the insurgency that we've seen in parts of Northeast Nigeria for over 12 years.
And again, I refer back to the work that was presented by Nextier, the database. It's very interesting, especially in how you map the different conflicts in the country. And from my perspective, and one approach that I promote is often to understand conflict before you intervene. And you cannot intervene well in a conflict if you do not understand the dynamics. When you do, you will be reinforcing the conflict instead of resolving it. When you look at the conflict types that you see about 6-7 conflict types, and therefore a genuine approach, a genuine holistic response to conflicts in Nigeria, including banditry, is to be context specific. It's to develop a general framework which is based on values. So because something is context specific doesn't mean that you can't have a framework that is general. So the general framework should be based on values of transparency, accountability, inclusion, fairness, justice, and these issues. That's the general framework. These are principles that builds the framework. Under that framework, you will now apply to specific conflicts. So in banditry, what are the context-specific issues? I mean, clearly, we see that when you read the report, you see that there are some communities where you have very high incident rate and some with low incident. And you can tell that the drivers in these communities are different. That while banditry in the Northwest, in Zamfara, is driven by some local issues, you can tell that those issues are largely different when it comes to Southern Kaduna, for example. So I will advocate for a holistic framework that is based on principles. And then within that holistic framework, you now have context-specific response. Another thing that is important in developing a framework is identifying the actors. So in each context, what type of peace building, what type of peace building institutions exist? When I mean peace building institutions, I talk about both state and non-state. One thing that I would like to point out is in the report, you can see that the one incident, we had 77 deaths just because of one military action. The military is also known to be developing peace building programs in the Northeast in the name of Operation Safe Corridor. You cannot have the same institution responsible for designing and implementing the peace building process perpetrating violence at that scale in the same context. So that the military needs to come, like these peace building institutions that intervene in conflict should be governed by principles and values so that they will not be killing people in one community while building peace in another, which there are questions we can ask about that. So I do not have an ironclad response to that, but to say that again, the Nigerian peace building architecture in response to any form of conflict should be based on agreed principles, which is developed in conjunction between the state, civil society, communities, and other actors that are relevant to the process.
Okay, thank you so much, Tarila. Let's quickly move away from non-combative measures. In recent times, given the scale of violent conflicts or armed conflicts in Nigeria, we've seen multiple responses from the government side and non-state actors. We've seen the rise of self-defense militias, both the ones sanctioned or backed by government and the ones based on group identities or what have you. And we've also seen or projected some type of from that uncoordinated responses to insecurity. And I would like to specifically mention the conversations that are endless about state police. Hadia, please, I would like to know, does the NGF, that's the Nigerian Governors Forum, have a collective stand on state police? And if no, how can the NGF, actually your office, work towards harmonizing operations and strategies of many of these types of quasi policing agencies we have in Nigeria?
Thank you for your question. The issue of state police is a critical issue that's been ongoing in Nigeria for quite some time. At the moment, there is no constitutional provision for state police in Nigeria. At the federal level, police is organized, and I think in some ways, partly due to the consensus platform of the governors coming together and expressing their desire to have state police, there have been some amendments into the police bill, which has now made provision for community policing. Which I believe and the forum believes is a step in the right direction. And so this community police is the solution, the compromise that we've had so far between federal and the subnational. And the community police, if you look at some other best practice models around the world, when you look at some models, they have different police agencies at the state, like the regional level, state level, and county level. And I think that with a country of around 200 million population, we need to have a significant security force, whether it's going to come in the presence of police, community policing, whichever agency, whatever happens, we need more numbers on ground. And when speaking to some of the people directly in the space, their concerns are when you bring in people from police from different states who are not familiar with the terrain, who are not familiar with the background, who don't stay for a long time and leave as well, which are part of the arguments why they want to see state policing happening, and which are part of the arguments why community policing is happening in the first place. So as a position, I think that community police is a step in the right direction for many reasons. And state police is something that's ongoing, and we're not there yet in Nigeria, but there's a lot that can be done in the community police section. Like the Southwest states have already come up with their own. Benue State is in the process of having one, also community policing at the moment. It's community police, it's not state police. And these things are key. And what we want to profess through dialogue and communicating and networking is to make sure that these community police take in local actors. Like you said, you can't solve a problem if you don't fully understand the problem. The first step in any problem solving exercise is first awareness. And awareness includes identifying the key actors. So I think community police has an opportunity to address these problems because these problems are different across the nation. And each problem needs to be domesticated and treated according to the locale that it's in. So I want to see community police include traditional rulers in some cases, whether they come in the form of the northern traditional format or southern chief format, some of our elders who to be involved. I mean, before we became, and it's a good thing about this cultural aspect, I want to see more cultural solutions so that we're not just doing a cookie cutter solution in Nigeria. We want to take our own personal identification and national identity into consideration. You know, Nigerians are very unique people, and I think part of the problem we're having is these solutions that are being professed across the nation are not taking into consideration our unique cultural identity enough. That's why I think each solution needs to come down to the community level and take key actors who are non-state, like we said earlier, representation is a major issue that we're having. And by representation, I mean the people who are on the ground, who are impacted, who face these problems every day, who are having these struggles every day, you know, who cannot have access to police on the federal level, to IG police on the federal level, who have no choice normally but to turn to the chieftain in their village, or turn to the district head in their village, or whoever's closest to them. So these people who, and we also have an issue of trust across the nation between the authorities and the general population. But this issue of trust is not, it's better between the people and the traditional rulers and the community rulers and community elders and whatnot. So we'd like to see this take advantage of the strengths that we have already and move them into community policing solution. So just to summarize, community policing should include key representatives from the non-state community, civil society community. Also, I think what another exercise that needs to move forward is we need to hear more from, I don't know how to classify them, whether we just refer to them as the criminal elements, the people who are actually instigating the issues that we're having. There needs to be more dialogue with them as well. And definitely there needs to be more members of the community who are in a position to identify them. So somebody coming from another state will not be able to identify the people who are engaging in the problems around. So all the solutions definitely need to be community-wise, localized, and then, like you said, you know, guiding principles on a national level, so that basic respect for international guiding principles, respect for life, respect for property, the standard things, and then come down and make sure that the people who populate these things are from the local community and include the different levels of key stakeholders that need to participate and be involved in.
Thank you, thank you. So certain things do come up. Most of the responses need to be knowledge-based. We need to understand, we need to identify, we need to go to the field. Yes, we need to talk to who is at this point where we are having issues. We need to tailor solutions to the realities of each, crisis locations.
Brothers against brothers. So in order to find solutions and also to identify them, we need members of that community who are related, because we haven't gotten to the point, at least outside the Northeast region, we haven't got to the point where it's full-blown terrorism yet in Nigeria, like in some other countries. We're not there yet, and by God's grace, we will never get there by God's grace. So since our issues are still day-to-day issues, and we're still in a position where we can hopefully curb it and address it before it explodes and turns something else of a negative.
Thank you. By God's grace, the right actions.
Yeah.
So speaking on, since we are already talking about knowledge, the research that has to go in, I have to come back to Professor Alumna. What can government and donor agencies, we have people that work for government and donor agencies in the room and virtually, using research, or what can they do differently using research to, address the trend of armed conflicts in northern Nigeria and its, ripple effects on the population and stability in and out of the region?
Actually, we position the coercive forces of the states. The coercive forces of the states appears to have been overwhelmed. So government needs to withdraw back and look at it. People are talking of state police. Some people are against it, but we still have to look at what available option can help us. Then peace building. My brother here talked about context specific. These issues varies. So donor agencies, some of them I know are also working in the Northeast and the North Central to look at the specific issues surrounding these banditry and see how to come up with strategies that can really bring lasting peace. Then for me, government also have to define its end state. In every war, you have an end state. What does government really want to achieve? If you have the end state, then every other thing will be working towards that end state. Both the media, both politics, diplomacy, international relations, everything will be working towards the end state. But the way things are presently, one can say that government has not defined its end state because of what one might call political labeling. There's this sort of confusion over how do we label some groups. Some groups are being labeled outrightly. Some are being labeled in a very mild way. So we have to sit back and define the end states through research and know what is government's end states of this war against banditry. If that is defined, then other policies, other steps will begin to flow. The media will now come up with campaigns that will be working towards that end state. The political class will also be working towards, it's not just enough to send the military. We blame the military at all points, but it's not all about the military. The state itself must define its end state. And it is time we commission a sort of research that will look at all these and come up with key policy recommendations that will help us. And then the social contract thesis. You see, people gave up their rights in order for the state to protect them. But at the point where the state is no longer capable of doing that, the fallout is what we are seeing. So we also have to go back to the drawing board, come up with policies that will help to cushion the effects of what is happening in the country. The social contract theory, people are suffering, unemployment, we don't have policies, we have ad hoc issues of trying to cushion effects, which in most cases are all politicized. So these are all issues that with research, I believe government can be able to do things differently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Prof has basically told us, begin with the end in mind, a famous quote by Stephen Covey. And he has also importance of research in the responses that we intend to, implement. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's the first session of the launch of the Nigeria security situation analysis. We'll jump right into the audience participation. We'll have 1 minute per participants that want to ask a question. We have our online participants as well. So we're also taking questions from there. We have someone that will be available to pass the mic in the event that you have a question or a comment. So for want of time, kindly limit your response to less than a minute. Thank you. Okay. Hands, please, so we can manage the, okay.
Thank you for all your...
Sorry, I have to cut you. So when you want to speak, you tell us your name and probably the organization you represent.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. I'm Gordon Okuko. I work with Mexico. Just to, if I could if they could share more light specifically to Hajia Fatima on specifically the role that the governors are playing around addressing the root causes of the Banditry and Terrorism actions within the northwestern states specifically. And then that idea talks also about the efforts that are being done around the missing link also. Do we think that on the missing link, do we think that the community stake actors have some very important role to play, specifically around looking at the role of ADR in addressing some of the early warning issues within those communities? Or we think that military issues can also address most of those challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Adejike. I want to make a little remark. The issue of banditry, insurgency, and all that in this country, I sincerely want to believe that we lack the political will to do the right thing. Prof mentioned labeling. Call a spade a spade. Anybody who runs foul of the law, deal with him appropriately. Now, Hajia, you talked about, you emphasized so much on the community police. I am an apostle of state police because I believe sincerely that if that it has been something like that in the past, and we travel abroad, we see how things are done. Why can't we replicate it here? Because if we have state police, we will curb this crisis, this insurgent, this violent conflicts to maximally. Because if you're talking about community policing, they are still taking orders from Abuja here. Somebody in Abuja here is telling me what's happening in my village. And they say policing is a local thing. It's localized. So we need to look at these things critically because you are from the Governors Forum. They should look at it. So some of them, people are saying that they don't want to, the governors will be tyrants and all that. I believe that if in the appointing process, when you want to appoint leaders, governors are insulated from it. That's a way you can commission these things, and people, Nigerians are brilliant people, come out with a better idea on how to handle this thing because we're running around it. It is not working. The present security architecture in the country is not working. Something has to be done. And the government must have a very strong political will to handle issues the way they come. Don't label things. If you are a terrorist, call it a terrorist. If you are what, say it the way it is and apply maximum force. Tarula, you talked about peace building. Now, I've observed that in what we are doing here is that you are applying DDR to people who are very strong. I expected that DDR should be applied to people who are willing to submit and people whom government had weakened. Now, almost a parity of power. There's nothing to show that these terrorists the powers are diminished, and we are applying a DDR to them. How can it work?
I'm sorry, Dr. Ejike. This is quite an inexhaustive conversation. I'm sorry, I have to cut you short, please.
My time.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Here, middle. Let's take 2 more, and then we'll come back to the panel for, yes, please. 1 minute, please, sir.
Okay. My name is Son Gyo, Dr. Son Gyo, University of Manchester. One is a comment and one is a question. The comment is for the prof. I was just looking at the framework you provided, and I thought it didn't quite, I didn't see how it quite address the political economy part of the problem. And I thought I would just add violence, crime, and terrorism, if you please. I mean, we look at that as a framework that might be, all inclusive. And the second is the space is for what specific steps are we doing or the country taking in terms of supporting the downstream, that's the state, at the state level, the gaps that were mentioned, that there were gaps. What's specific problem in terms of intelligence, funding, and technology? Because basically these are what we need and these are what are missing. We can't expect to get anything. We just want to know what the specific intervention are there. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more, please, beside him.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is AIG Osiniwa, retired. I work for KUSHAP Consulting. Talking about community policing and state policing, I think that we are already running state policing in this country. I mean, I think one of the problems we have here is definitions. What is the definition of police and policing? And by my understanding and my reading, any organization that is formed that has power to arrest, power to investigate, power to prosecute, power to go on patrols, power to carry out interviews, interrogation, and all that is a police organization. And in every state, there is an organization that is set up by governments that has these powers. And sometimes people think that to have the police power means having gun and moving around with guns, because what we hear is the other day, Governor Oton was saying that he's going to apply for AK-47. The gun does not define the power of the police. The power of the police is defined by the law. Guns are accessories. I mean, for those of you that live in UK, you don't see police officers with guns, and yet they do their job very well. So we're still running state police. For some of us, we are apprehensive of the nature of state policing, because as far as I'm concerned, if you have a police organization or an organization that has police powers that is independent of political manipulations and directives, then I'm comfortable with that kind of organization, because from my reading of the environment, the political environment, governors want to create their own personal militias. And you can see it, even when they create these quasi-police forces in their states, the next thing you see, the governor is looking like a general in the army, and he wears uniform. Everybody is wearing some form of uniform or the other. So as far as I'm concerned, we're already running police, state police, even though within an illegal context, because it does not relate to what the Constitution says. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to the panel while they think about the questions. Let me take some comments from our online participants. We have Matthias here. He says, spot on, we lack and have very limited public institutions with peace-building mandates in states. Hence, long-term peace-building plans in states are lacking. We also have Oladipo, and he says there was a time in history and the development of the United States of America that bandits and cattle rustling were seemingly the order of the day in certain regions of the country. What can we learn from that history? How were they dealt with? Evidence, research, knowledge. I'll come back to the panel, as I said. I'll start quite a few questions that were directed at you. Can you use 1 minute to respond?
I think I'll just before the general response. This issue of state police, I understand general public concern about, and also, various levels around the key decision makers about institutionalizing and legalizing state police. We're not there yet, and there's different reasons why, what people feel for it and people against it. That's besides the point. But as far as I'm concerned, we should work within existing parameters. There's no reason, because the problem is now and urgent. Since community policing has already been legalized, and there's policy for it, and there's room for it, let's see what we can do within that content for now. There's some states and some regions who are making progress in it. I think what we need to do is work together as a team. I don't like to see this issue of duplication all the time. If something doesn't work, we should just scrap it and get rid of it. I don't think that's the solution. I think the solution is to work with what we have and improve what we have, not ignore what we have. So as far as the police is concerned, some of the specific efforts that have been made, both along the federal and subnational level, is in terms of, I think the first step will be to increase the police force. I think there's a lot of efforts being done on recruitment at the moment. And then I think there needs to be quality recruitment. So there's definitely, we have teeming unemployed youths who have all graduated from different works of chronology, forensic and whatnot, who are unemployed at the moment. So and as a nation, we're also blessed to have such a healthy teeming population. Some countries are concerned because they have very low birth rates and the populations are aging. We are blessed to have strong population and, given the state of our education system, relatively well-educated, skilled youth people who can be put at work. And I would like to align myself with that. I think recruitment is a key issue, the quality of recruitment, and to work within existing parameters. Since state police is not approved at the moment, let's move away from that at the moment and focus on what we do have. The subnational, the principals have been advocating for state police for quite some time. We're not there yet. But I think it's definitely a very good step in the right direction where we are at the moment in terms of community policing. So, and then the issue of someone earlier mentioned that I bring somebody now from Abuja and take them to a state. That's not how community police works. The definition of community police is to work within that community. So there's not an issue of bringing somebody from one state unless you want to, unless there's some best practices of peer learning available at that. In the South, they've been struggling with militancy for before this issue of banditry and terrorism started happening in the Northwest and Northeast North Central. So there's definitely lessons to be learned from there and that we can apply. So I think, again, solution would be to have a content-specific, situation-specific solutions, community solutions that are acknowledged and informed by the experiences around the world, around the country, and to make sure that people executing this are supported. So community police does not mean they're going to be isolated and left there on their own. They have military to support them, federal police to support them, all the different security agencies. I think the main source here is not to make people autonomous, independent, it's how better to work together as a team. We're a rich country in terms of resources, and by resources, human resources, human capital resources. It's just a matter of putting them in the right place, communicating to them, identifying what the target goal is, what's the end issue that my colleague here was mentioning earlier, and get to it. Everybody is just professing the problem. When we start working towards the solution, I want solution oriented. And a way to work towards the solution is realize that their agencies, we have strength in number in certain agencies in the country. It's just an issue of bringing them together, which is what we're trying to do at the forum. Bring the key decision makers together in the state field, the state sphere, which is the security agencies, and then state actors or principals, non-state actors, the people in the community.
Hajia, I could listen to you talk all day about the solutions, but for want of time, I'll quickly give Tarila 30 seconds to just conclude and then come back to Professor Alomona for another 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. I will respond to two issues. One is the issue of ADRO in resolving the challenges raised by the colleague from Mexico. One of the consequences or the outcomes of violent conflicts in Nigeria is that it has weakened, it has undermined, it has displaced traditional institutions. In the Niger Delta, where actually I come from, actually people who participated in armed groups crowned themselves as traditional rulers. And we are seeing the replacement of traditional institutions based on history, culture, and tradition with that based on violence. The question then is, how can such an institution captured by a faction of violence now act as an ADRO institution in such a context? This is a difficult, this is the problem. It is a serious problem. That the institutions, this is why I say that in peace building, we need to understand the outcomes of conflict so as not to reinforce those outcomes. And finally, it's very important that I mentioned this.
5 seconds.
5 seconds. Is that empathy is very important in peace building. You need to have empathy towards not just the victims, but also to the perpetrators. So when you say they cannot be accommodated in DDR, I beg to differ. It's because peace building is not a matter of who is right or wrong, but it's really recreating, developing a new social contract.
Peace building is to recreate a new social. Yeah. Professor Luman, I'm sorry, here taking about 10 seconds from your time. So kindly wrap up, please.
Okay. From what my brother from Manchester said was that he could have preferred, if we have looked at the political economy of youth, of violence, that could have been a more preferred approach. Personally, I beg to differ, because if we come from that political economy approach, it could have been somehow problematic, because the banditry we are looking at a point masquerades as violence, as a point masquerades as banditry. Operationally and structurally, you find a meeting point between banditry and terrorism. If you adopt a political economy approach and go by trying to look at the economic imperatives behind what is propelling it, I don't think you will get the answer right, because take, for instance, what happened in the Niger Delta. They did all sorts of amnesty program. To some extent, it has worked. But the de-radicalization, has it worked? Has it really worked? We've had instances where people ran away from the program and still went back to it. In that context, it is more of ideological. So providing the answers through the political economy approach, for me, will not solve the problem, because it is more than just the political economy.
Thank you so much for making that brief and spot on. It's still the launch of the next year's security situation analysis report. A very thank you to our panelists, our participants, both virtual and physical, for joining us, for contributing, and for believing that Nigeria's security crisis is a conversation for all. In no particular order, Professor Alumona, thank you so much. Hadia, Kassina, thank you. Tarila, thank you. A round of applause as they make their way to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize once more. I said you'll be seeing my face more often. For those joining us, it's still the next the launch of the Nigeria Security Situation Analysis Report, based on track data from January 2021 till June 2022, 18 months of painstakingly tracked data on violent conflicts in Nigeria. Based on what we have for today, we'll quickly go to the second round of the video clip before we'll now usher in the panel for the session. While coming up, there have been quite some responses that can be implemented across Nigeria's different crisis types, and part of the vision for us for having this is solutions focused, to actually brainstorm on the solutions, to actually keep having the conversations, And for us at Nextier, we believe that evidence and reliable data should inform policies. And this is where we have found our, would I say, home. Okay, so here you go for the video clip.
Achieving security stability and secure public spaces in Nigeria. Public spaces are increasingly becoming unsafe in Nigeria. Security responses have not significantly stopped the emergence of new theaters of violence nor managed old ones. Lives, livelihoods, and public infrastructure have been impacted, leading to kidnappings, deaths, injuries, and displacements. Nextier Violent Conflict Database shows 8,157 deaths and 845 injured victims between January 2021 and June 2022. There have been attacks on security posts in the southeast, train passengers in the northwest, killing of worshippers in Owo, and the jailbreak at a correctional facility in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Ongoing conversations center on achieving stability in Nigeria's troubled locations and managing the spread of violence.
Again, very brief. Nigeria's security crisis or issues are inexhaustive. We can't have a complete conversation today, but we'll try as much as possible to touch on the issues. For our physical participants, we have a restroom behind you by the right. We still have the exit as you came. We have an exit in the first floor and in the ground floor, on the ground floor, I beg your pardon. Without further ado, permit me to welcome Didi Anyanwu. She's a policy research consultant at Nextier. She will be moderating the second session of this gathering this afternoon. A round of applause for Didi. You're going to sit. I'll give room for Ndidi to take over from the next round of conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sort of just sitting down. Like the video that was shared a few minutes ago, we've talked about banditry and terrorism. But from our database, we noticed that there's been an increase in courtism attacks, extrajudicial killings. There have been attacks on public transports and infrastructure. So basically, this session, like Ajia mentioned earlier, is to find solutions to, managing some of these issues. So let me not drag you so long. Let me invite the panelists for this session. First on my list, like he mentioned, my name is Ndidi, and I'm a policy consultant with Nextier. The first person sitting on this panel for the second session of this event is Dr. Hussaini Abdul. Dr. Hussaini is a development and humanitarian specialist. He's a scholar and he has written extensively. He's currently the country director of CARE International in Nigeria. Thank you for coming. The next person on my list is Chris Ngoder. He's the Director General, National Early Warning Center. He has worked on conflict, human security, policy, and development issues for over a decade. Thank you. And the last and not the least is Dr. Joseph Ochogu. He served as a member and technical expert to the Presidential Committee on Community Policing and Internal Security, but currently he's the Director, Research and Policy Analysis, Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. Thank you for coming. If you permit me, just for 2 minutes, your general overview. I know you've been sitting here for a while. We've talked about banditry and terrorism, but there are so many other security issues that we are, facing as a country. If you can just run us through what your perspectives are over these things. Thank you, Dr. Chris. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And first of all, I think to commend Nextier for the work it's doing in facilitating these dialogues. Because we've sort of oversubscribed the analysis of the problems, maybe I'll just go ahead and proffer some solutions, flowing from the previous conversation. In my sense of the situation is that you can't really address this issue without engaging with the phenomenon of ungoverned spaces, what we call ungoverned spaces. And there is a clear correlation between the presence of ungoverned spaces and violence by armed non-state actors, the proliferation of armed non-state actors. So where you've seen large spaces, large chunks of territory where you do not have governmental presence, there is a tendency to find that armed non-state actors are just hibernating in those places. So to my mind, the first thing we need to get back to is the idea of local governance. Local governance has essentially ceased to exist. Nigeria is a big country, it's a populous country, and there is some logic, there is a reason why we are a three-tier federation. And I suppose one of the big challenges we have is that when you travel out of Abuja, or you're in the States and you travel out of state capitals, you begin to encounter ascending degrees of statelessness. The level of state presence, governmental presence in communities steadily wears away until you get to places where there is virtually really no sign, perhaps except for maybe the presence of roads, maybe, that you are in a country called Nigeria. And that to me is symptomatic of the collapse of local governance. Now, I must stress that I'm using this almost in contraposition to the idea that I do hear a lot of talk about traditional rulers and the need to integrate them more. And I think that while there is some merit to that, it seems to me there's a misdiagnosis going on. It's not the absence of traditional rulers that is the problem, it's the absence of local governance. And traditional rulers, by the way, are non-state actors anyway. And more importantly, I think, as Tarila pointed out, in the interest of context-specific understanding of issues, we must note that in certain areas where you have conflict, the chieftaincy institution is part of that problem. It's a bone of contention in certain places. So whether you're talking of maybe Southern Kaduna, for example, or the Plateau or parts of Bauchi State, or even in Delta State, you will find that the chieftaincy institution is a part of the problem, not necessarily the solution. But what you want is local governance, because what is happening is that you've got a democracy deficit and a governmental deficit. There's a federal government, there's a state government. Then when you travel down, there is nothing. I agree that something like security and policing is local, is best conducted locally. That is true. However, without a local governance structure, then there's simply nobody to conduct it at that stage. And I think the logic of federalism is that the most essential tasks to human well-being are best conducted locally. So education, healthcare, agriculture, for example, garbage disposal, security. But in the absence of local governance structures, you have that, it's a vacuum. That's what we describe as ungoverned spaces. The ungoverned spaces are not just in rural areas. They can be forest reserves. They can be our national parks that nobody, there's really nothing going on there. And they can be in cities, abandoned ghettos in cities. So when you study the spread of urban conflict in, let us say, northern Nigeria, for example, you will find that particular slums or particular ghettos have specific properties, and you can identify those properties. They tend to be densely populated. There's an absence of governance, absence of social infrastructure, absence of policing presence. Those places tend to be hotspots for what we describe as crisis when those things erupt. Secondly, on the issue of community policing, I propose that as a solution. But let me point out, I think the AIG, I think you made an excellent observation. The discourse around state policing is conducted in a very strange fashion. We have state police forces, and he's described what a police force is. I think what we're really arguing about is the democratization of the control of coercive instruments. You do not want a situation where only the president controls coercive instruments. And so we are conflating policing with guns, which in itself is a problem. You have state police authorities in many states, as many as 25 states have quasi-policing authorities. So for example, if you take the Anambra Vigilante Service, for example, it's an institution created by law. So its name is a misnomer. It's a state police authority.
there shouldn't be, it's not a vigilante group. It's not a vigilante service. Once you are created by law, you cannot be vigilante. A vigilante, by definition, operates outside the law. If you are a creature of statute, then you are a police authority. Now, the Firearms Act specifies what kind of weapons are under subject to federal gun control. So you can actually arm your state police forces. It's just that, I suppose, based on current threat assessment, you would have a mismatch. But I'm stressing this because I feel that this conversation about state policing is at the risk of derailing. We must know what we are talking about. What we're arguing about is who has control over guns, not who can create state police. You have state police. Amotekun, for all intents and purposes, is state police. You have state police in many places. So I think what we need to figure out is a framework that helps regulate those institutions at state level. The fears about state police are entirely founded. We used to have subnational policing before. For those of us that remember the Native Authority Police, the reason we scrapped the Native Authority Police and federalized control of police was because Native Authority Police was prone to abuse. And you had huge, entire political movements were built around the banning, or I should say the abrogation of Native Authority Police. The traditional rulers, particularly in the North, used it to suppress political opponents. Now, these are matters of historical record. So it's important that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we are saying state police is the answer, subnational police is the answer, and then forget the lessons of history. Now, what I would concede is that you must have three-tier policing or multi-tier policing. And so all the arguments for community policing have already been accommodated in the current laws. Lastly, I really don't want to take up time. And by the way, I must apologize. I'm going to be disappearing very soon. Lastly, the issue of justice, restorative justice and transitional justice. We are talking about in the context of safer public spaces. If you take cities like Kaduna and Jos, and Dr. Abdul has done excellent work on Kaduna, so I will not speak too much to that, but the idea is that you have places where you've had communal conflicts. After communal conflicts, victims of what happened see perpetrators of violence walking around freely. They realize that they cannot stay in the same area with these people, and then they move away. So in places like Jos and Kaduna, this accounts for the kind of segregation that we've recorded over 20, 30 years. It's the absence of justice. Now, if you're dealing with certain kinds of problems, certain kinds of conflict, adversarial justice is not enough. And I think that's the point that Tarila makes when we talk about peace building, that you cannot have an issue, depending on the context, right? Just simply rule out a constituency, a party to that conflict on the grounds that, oh, they are wrong or somebody is right. What restorative justice tries to do is to heal community and to reconstruct the social contract. Now, that does not mean, as sometimes we imply, that there will be no reckoning. It just means that there must be nuance. So in the Northeast, for example, we must recognize that among the numbers that we're dealing with in terms of the people coming in as repentant terrorists are those that were conscripted. There were those that were abducted. There were those that were, for all intents and purposes, child soldiers. You cannot treat them in the same way as you would treat ideologues and core combatants. So the nuance is necessary for dealing with all of these issues. Let me stop here.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. From what I've picked so far, like you mentioned earlier, there have been cases where traditional rulers were, some arrested, mentioned as in they were dealing with bandits. Yeah, so that's really key. And then democratization of our policies, not just in terms of us having issues at the national level. The earlier we learn how to, break it down, have a bottom-up approach to some of these things. Yeah, that will go a long way. Thank you. So, but before you go, just let's hear from Dr. Hussein. Yeah, just 1 minute.
No, why, please? No.
Thank you. I don't know where to
I'll try. I'll try to be a bit provocative in my conversations. One, I think we are not discussing Nigeria's security challenges enough. And we are actually, as a country, we're not having a conversations because the state of the country at the moment is almost at a state that you cannot talk. You can't have a conversations. The depth of mutual distrust within the country is unimaginably high, that each dynamics and dimensions of violent conflict is interpreted by different groups in different ways. And whatever you put on the table in terms of your own understanding, unless it fits into the narrative of the other person, it is outrightly rejected and not acceptable. And therefore, many people hold back. Some of us hold back in terms of explaining our understanding of these dynamics because you don't want to be simplistically labeled as one thing or the other, because some of those labels, we're a country of massive labeling, and those tags easily hangs on your neck. And so if you have invested years of work in a particular area, you don't want one ignorant person who does not even understand what you are talking about to just dismiss you with a wave of hand. And therefore, no conversation. And we've seen that even among government. Government is very reluctant. They can't do certain things because you are also afraid that it will not be accepted by the other side. Or therefore, when you do this way in this side, you must do it in the other side as well, even if it does not fit. So that's the dynamics. You make IPOP, you call it a terrorist organization, and therefore you have no option than to call the bandit in the Northwest as terrorist organization because you have to balance. So and this is what is not allowing for conversations to take place. I'm happy we are having this, but some of the things I'll be putting on the table may sound a bit provocative. One, look, banditry. Who calls it a bandit? Who defines it? Where did we get the name from? How do we know that what you are experiencing is banditry? Why is it not just kidnapping for ransom? Why is it not armed robbery? Why is it not just gunmen? Why do we call it banditry? At what point did we decide who labeled it? So where did you get that from? And if you do a study, banditry is a historical process. We understand it. It may be, but it may not be. Because the media calls this bandits, and then everybody thinks, and even I've seen scholars writing research papers just defining it as it is banditry. And that's all you go and struggle and find what's the definition of a banditry, and you put it that way. So for me, if you have a crisis of this scale that the country is going through, and of course, and we need to recognize that it's not a Nigerian crisis. It's a major regional crisis. It's a crisis that has pervaded the entire Sahel. And even before this crisis, of the Sahel, there are similar crises in other parts of Africa. I don't even want to give example of other part of the world, but just Africa. So what is so peculiar about Nigeria? Why all the shout and all those things about Nigeria? What is so peculiar? What is peculiar is because we are Nigerians, and this affects us. It affects our life, and therefore we want to deal with the Nigerian dimension of that problem. Now the question we need to ask ourselves is that, are we able to deal with the Nigerian dimension of a regional problem without strategically dealing with the driving factors, even regionally?
So now that leads me to some of the conversation, and I really, really agree with you, and I thank you very much for putting some of those things on the table. Look, the first thing we need to understand is, how did we get to where we are? I don't think, and I'm sorry, with very due respect to my colleagues on the first panel, I don't really think that we got to the gamut of these issues. How did we get to where we are? Nigeria has never been governed by a centralized state. Never in our history, right from the colonial time. And even the pre-colonial states that emerged before Nigeria, never. There is never a time a central state had the totalizing control of Nigeria. No time. Even the colonial authorities, when they came, they have to find other ways of holding the country together and managing insecurity. And up to the time, particularly for northern Nigeria, 60 years or 56 years after the rule, they haven't still been able to achieve that. What happened? The military rule over the years and the oil boom that we had has that arrogance of believing that it can put the entire country under one control. And therefore, one, dissolve the traditional institutions. I'm not a fan of it in the first place, so I'm happy. And so yeah, basically that's what they dissolved that, brought everything under one umbrella, and in the course of doing that, creating vacuums. Because you are trying to do the impossible. And so what you have are not ungoverned spaces, but rather alternatively governed spaces. Because nature abhors vacuum. When you don't have the central arm being able to control a particular space, a new governing structure emerges. A new governing structure emerges. And it is not all alternative governing structures that are criminal. It's not all that are criminal. Some are not criminal. But we don't cry. We don't see those ones because they are not violent. They are not criminal. So you don't see those ones. When market women associations decide to manage the market, irrespective of the failure of the government, you don't feel that because crime is not taking place at that moment. But when you have a situation where some people have occupied certain territories and perpetrating crime, we see that part of it. So what we are dealing with is that the state has actually failed to live up to what it knew right from the beginning it can do. Two things made us go into those. One, we had oil resources, and therefore you can create new structures, new institutions. You have the Nigerian Police Force, or whatever we call it. You created Federal Road Safety Commission. You created the Nigerian Civil Defense. You created the Civil Defense Corps. You created several other structures that are not built into that original structures that you actually have in place. And therefore, each one doing a different thing. So for me, what are the solutions? What do we need to do about it? I think we must recognize, for me in the immediate, that expectation that we can have a central state with a totalizing control over every community and over every entity in this country is not possible. It can't work. And therefore, and when I mean state here, I'm including state government, because the whole idea is not about federal government ceding power to state government. It is about the state ceding power to the people. That's the conversation. So, like he said, you want to decentralize policing, you created vigilante, and then you enact a law. And then you call it a vigilante. Vigilantism presupposes volunteerism and operating outside the arm of the state. And that is where sometimes some people are very skeptical about why you should have vigilantes or not to have it. So what you need to do is recognize that, and that's what we're seeing all over the world, that there is a new conversations around the state beyond the typical Weberian conception about the state having the monopoly of arms and control and that efficient bureaucracy, to a what we call the Chastilian conception. That look, it can be decentralized, and that even including having arms. But you must put up mechanisms to actually be able to deal with some of those things. And I think that this is the conversation we are not having, even when the government recognize that these are the realities on ground. We are not having this conversation. The automation of Benue, and it's part of those things. The feeling that, look, we should do it. We had the same variant in Zamfara when the current governor said people should go and carry arms. At least Autumn tried to create its own structure and say he wants to arm them. But the other one just pronounced that people should defend themselves. And we have similar statement from Masari in Kasena, who probably tried to also later clarify some of those things. So I think this is the kind of conversation we need to do. We must recognize that the way the trends of things and in this country, that we must have an alternative conversations in dealing with these issues. And it's not simplistically about state government having police. I want to agree with my very good friend and brother, that we already have enough of those structures. I think is the laziness in our conversations and the laziness of state governments in actually taking up what they have done. In Kano, you have ISMA. You set it up by law. There's a law establishing it. And they do basic policing job. You may say that the policing structure is probably not secular, but the policing is policing, and that's what they are doing. And there are similar other platforms across in the northern part of the country. So why do you say you don't have state police? What's the relationship between this institution? I always ask them, the fears that people have. I don't have problem having your state police, but you shouldn't dismiss people's fear. And I think that's the most important thing. Ask yourself, how is the State Independent Electoral Commissions performing? This is a constitutional body. It's a constitutional body. How is it performing? That's one question we should ask ourselves. How, for instance, is, despite all the structures of the central structure of the Judicial Service Commission, how are the state judiciary performing? Despite that you have even the central managed process of the Judicial Service Commission, but check your magistrate court and sometimes some of your state high court and area court and Sharia court and check how they relate with the center. I think I've taken all of your time. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to be a bit more provocative around this and see if we can open up these conversations and begin to discuss the real issues rather than actually sweeping some of those things and that's being trying to be politically nice and ensure that you don't hurt your neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I actually forgot to mention that you're also a historian. So thank you so much for taking us all that way. And Dr. Ochogo, I'll come back to you, but Dr. Chris will leave us in 5 minutes. So I just need him to run us through. He's the director, like I said, he's coordinating the National Early Warning Center for our country. So I just need him to run us through what their early warning mitigation plans has been over the period. Yeah.
Okay, 2 things. First of all, for the sake of clarification, I'm not a doctor. I have no doctorate. I am Mr. You know, these things get people into trouble later.
Claim it. Just claim it.
Okay, I'm claiming it for later. Secondly, the National Early Warning Center, in a nutshell, because we don't have much time, think of the insights, the kind of insights that we've tried to debate or discuss here. And then the data behind it. The center was set up to harvest that kind of data, essentially, to interrogate these issues, adopt a more evidence-based approach to understanding issues around crisis and conflict prevention, threats to human security in general, and to feed those insights upwards to ECOWAS, because we're established under an ECOWAS statute, and then to feed it up to our principals at the highest levels. The idea is to set the stage for more evidence-based decision-making and policy-making around issues that have to do with threats to human security. That, in a nutshell, is it. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I must apologize. I have to leave now. I'm being summoned by higher powers.
Thank you so much.
Yes, kind of powers are making.
Sorry. Dr. Joseph, I know I cut you short, but if you can just give us your view, a brief overview of your understanding or perspective of what we are going through. Thank you.
I think largely I wouldn't bother to delve on the problematics around the issues of security, you know, in Nigeria, but to just look at some quick targets, specific kind of policy recommendations or interventions that I think that are likely to make a difference. I think the first one is that in the process of any nation building, one of the first things that you need is elite consensus. In Nigeria, we don't have elite consensus. And in any society where there is no elite consensus over very critical issues, then you begin to find the kind of reinforcements, you know, of violence around our different fault lines, the way we are experiencing, you know, and the different interpretations, you know, that is given to some of the phenomena that is happening around us as it relates to security. So elite consensus is very, very important. And it's in Nigeria, you find the caliber, the nature of our elites, you know, the way they interpret things and the way they look at things. It's, I'm sorry to say, it's very appalling. And I think that I'm saying from experience, maybe because I've worked within the policy arena, you know, over the years, and even at the highest level of government, you know, in terms of attending the highest decision-making body for over 6 years in this country. And you see the level of debate and the level of conversation, you know, at best, oftentimes is not too different from a pedestrian engagement. So when you look at that kind of discussion, you begin to see the very sharp disconnect between research and policy, you know, in our public space in Nigeria. So there is a very sharp disconnect. We can generate as much evidences as we like, you know, but how well does it inform policies, you know, of government, you know, becomes another major challenge. So I think that we need to expound conversations on how to begin to get our policies to work for us. The second one also is the disjointed nature, you know, within which either security forces work or even the ministries, department, and agencies. Because broadly, when we talk about security, we are talking about the hard and the soft. So not just the military security component, but looking at the soft aspect of it, you know, which some various institutions, you know, represent in terms of when you look at issues around governance in the health sector, in the education sector, you begin to discover that public service delivery itself is at the core of security management. So when that is lacking is another major problem. Another thing that we need to look at critically too is the gross disconnect between our security forces and the people. So when a colleague talks about issues about local governance, it does not end only on local governance, but even local ownership. The police and even the vigilante or the ones they are creating, they are increasingly disconnected from the people on the street. And once you have a security system or a policing system that is not there for the service of the people, then you create that gap, that distrust, and then you create elements for rogue elements within the society to begin to buy loyalty of these people because they must run to something, they must defer to something. So beyond ungoverned spaces, beyond the several issues around is the fact that Nigerian people are disconnected from the security system. Our security system, I'm sorry to say, is a highly elitist system. It is just there to serve the interest of people who have access to power and people who are representing certain interests and all that. And I can tell you, if you go to market, you can understand what I'm saying. So it is the local arrangement that people make for themselves in various large communities that are largely responsible for protection and for providing some level of aids, you know, for policemen. Not too long ago, just about a week ago, we had to support our local community because of incidences of kidnapping. Sadly, also, my colleagues have said it too, is the issue of the lack of empirical conceptualization of the kind of threats that we face. And I think my colleague talked about the just lump bandits. And I had privilege to have mentioned this in the Office of National Security Advisor when they were designing the 2019 National Security Strategy. If you don't conceptualize a threat properly and understand it properly, how do you begin to deploy? And the form of tools or capability, that you need to deploy, to quench that threat. Is it the capability with the police, with the state service, with the military, which arm of the military, and all that? So we have this kind of disjointed approach, in how we engage in some of these things. So I think that one of the things Nextpedia will have to be doing is to look at some of these very critical specifics, that are not even there so much in the literature, which actually is one of the things that is burdening our system. First and foremost, issues around elite consensus, which is very, very important. At the national level, you need elite consensus. At the state level, you need elite consensus. At the local government level, you need elite consensus. So the point is that, who are our elites? How do we recruit our elites? So that is another issue altogether that we need to interrogate, to look at it. Then a second one too, it's how we can get our public agencies to deliver public service in terms of service delivery. Once there is no service delivery, there is a gross disconnect between the citizens and the state. And once there is a disconnect between the citizens and the state, they begin to look for alternatives. And these alternatives can come in any form. So I think that development partners too will need to help in this direction. And I know why I'm saying this, because I was in this country around 2002, 2003, when the EFCC was forced to come on place. Those are all products of pressures coming from diplomatic community to ensure that you must establish XY institutions, otherwise your next budgeting system, we're not going to be part of it, we're not going to support it. So a lot of diplomatic pressure to need to come on setting up some of these parameters, for development. There are things like I speak in some military cycles on lesson learning. I had thought with the experiences in the Northeast would have been providing some of the best examples for out of the country, with the level of knowledge, intelligence, human resource that we have. But sadly, that has not been, because every critical stakeholder seems to be working in silos. We are good at creating institutions, but these institutions don't even perform. If you create any institution today, the next thing is to put it through a bureaucratic structure, like what you have in the colonial era and what you have in certain things and all that. And functions that could be delivered by 20 or 25 persons, you find close to 500 to 1,000 persons in such thing. So you really can't get the best, for the system. So I think elite consensus and the need, to connect with the people, it's very key, at addressing some of these issues that have been raised. I think I'll leave it now and wait for another level of intervention.
Thank you so much. I'm picking out the disconnection that you actually mentioned. Because if you check the report that we shared, I'm just wondering, maybe I could be wrong. There seems to be some significant improvement in terms of terrorist attacks and all that. But from what you have an increase in terms of cultism-related attacks, extrajudicial killings, kidnapping is like, it has become a norm. So I don't know, what is your view? Do you think probably we concentrated so much in the issue in the Northeast, and then we maybe somehow forgot that we also need to, find a way to holistically manage some of these things? I don't know, I'm asking, I'll come back.
Okay. Thank you very much. I happen to be on about a 1-hour television program on NTA, and the point is that you would have perhaps said, because I'm paid by the government, I shouldn't say certain things that I need to say. But no, I say it because, like I said, the government pay me to do the work I do as a researcher. So I'm free to say a couple of things. One, there is an increasing liberalization of violence across the country, to which we must accept. And an increasing build-up in terms of the culture of violence, that has actually pervaded every strata of our society. So before we used to talk about cultism in the tertiary institutions, but today we talk of cultisms in primary schools. Perhaps deeply entrenched in some parts of the Middle Belt and in the southern parts of the country, but cultism is real. So the point now again is that our sister from the Governors Forum is not here. Not much is being done at the state government level. I must be very frank. I've been involved in the last 10, 15 years on trying to improve governance systems at the sub-national level with the FID program, from Savvy, to PEL and all that, and seeing how to enthrone some level of good governance at that level. But it's not happening, it's not working. And that still serves as the space that we are talking about. You need to go to different state government, and most of the governors are in Abuja. So there is no governance in that place there. I told some people some things that if you spend 4 billion naira, 2 billion in Taraba, as at 2007 when we went there for a research project, the state will feel it. But that money is never spent there. The money comes to Abuja, goes to Lagos, and from Lagos, it disappears into different parts of. So when you have that kind of deficit in governance, you cannot escape a culture of violence. And that is the truth. So we need to work on our systems. One, we need to work on our policing system, on our military system in terms of training and doctrine, to know that the kind of approach, the way we've trained our men in the military security and all that, we have to refocus it on people-centered with some bit of empathy and effective service delivery for the people, not just an elitist kind of training, in terms of state security system, but looking at people security system. So once we are able to change our training and doctrine for the military and the policing system and all that, that will further help to build and strengthen the institutional capacity of these people to deliver to the Nigerian people and not necessarily to the elites that are in power. So that is very key. I think another thing too is, how do we begin to take advantage of some of the pluses that perhaps this particular government have done in terms of some of the executive order? You might not know the implication of the FIU law, the FIU order that went in, that once an allocation gets to state, the joint account allocation committee between the state and the local government, it comes, the local government chairman must be responsible. What that means is that the money gets to the local government for service delivery. But you might be surprised that because of the overwhelming power that the state governors wield and their overwhelming control through of the State Independent Electoral Commission, they still decide who the local government chairman is, who is loyal to. So at the federal level, there is so much focus at the federal level in terms of even we as civil society practitioners, government practitioners in terms of research and all that, there is an over concentration of our work at the center in terms of issues around transparency, accountability, and all that. But at the state level, if you are a labor activist, you do opposition to a state governor, you might disappear overnight. There is a National Union of Teachers chairman in a particular state in the North Central who advocated for issues of salary and all that. In the night, they robbed him and killed him. Till today, issues around opposition in the state died off. So we need to champion some of these things at the sub-national level, where all these data that we've generated actually are coming from. And until we are able to do that, put pressures on the systems, to get them to work, get them to be accountable, we really might be running in a cycle. Thank you.
Just to add, and thank you very much for that. Just to add that once the state, and generically, the state get demystified in terms of its lack of capacity to hold on that monopoly of means of violence, then you begin to have massive issues and cases of violence across the country. And I think this is one of the challenges we're dealing with at the moment, because there is also that culture of impunity that you can do anything and still get away with it. So anybody can have. And then we also saw that massive proliferation of small arms and light weapons. And And that can be traced to a lot of issues. Statistics are sometimes very scary in terms of what is not just what is coming from the Sahel region or through the desert, but also what is even coming through our ports. So it is very scary in terms of the number of people that have access to small arms and light weapons. And I think one major challenge we also have is this lack of interest. I don't want to say capacity, but lack of interest in disaggregating, some of our crises or violent conflicts. We are not able to disaggregate them. So we work with the media. If the wave of the media concern is on this particular issue, everybody turns there, even the government reacts to it on the basis of media interest. Of course, we had a very big issue. And since 2009, when the Boko Haram issue began to escalate, it didn't become a major national issue until around 2012. And then everybody started talking about it. But some of us have been writing about studying and writing about this banditry since 2010. But for an average Nigerian, you talk about what they classify as banditry today, they think it started yesterday. They think it's a new phenomenon. But as far back, I was doing a documentation for Clean Foundation. We're writing about the violence. We didn't call it banditry. This banditry name was a recent one. But documenting that, 2011, 2012, a lot of report coming up around that, because the whole country was more interested in the conflict in the northeast of the country, and our attention went there. Even with some governors, when you have cases of harder farmers conflict, like in Plateau and some part of Nasarawa, there was a particular point. The governor of Plateau State, Jonah Jang, was insisting that it was Boko Haram that came to Plateau. Because at that time, that was the only conversation that was in the country. That's what people were interested in. And that's what also attracts attention and funding. So I think it's that lack of capacity or lack of interest in disaggregating and dealing with problems based on what colleagues mentioned here earlier, context specificity. Try to understand the dynamics within the particular local context and deal with it on that basis. So if you take, for instance, what Nigerians call banditry, the dimension and its expression in Zamfara is totally different from the way it expresses itself in Kaduna, or even to the nearest neighborhood in Sokoto. What you have, the data we saw here from Niger, the dynamics of the situation in Niger is different from the one in Zamfara. So, but you cannot use one brush to actually expect to deal with some of those things. Crime is increasing in many of our places because, again, it pays. And that was what one of the guests did mention earlier. What about the political economy of it? You can't. If you want to explain these dynamics, you have to look at it within this tripod of one, grievances. Because sometimes when we begin to discuss this issue, we talk more, we overemphasize the grievances. You must look at the greed dimension. And that is why the political economy comes in. And then you look at the opportunities. So what does the grievances bring? Look, people talk about it, there is poverty, there is unemployment, there are differences in ethnicity and exclusion, whether political repression, and all those things that we can talk about that people can always complain about that can force people to say they want to react in a particular manner. But again, it's a rational choice. It's a rational choice. So now what we make them choose to carry arms? And that is where the benefit comes in. That's why the economic dimension comes in. You have to look at it. For people who study economics, the opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost of carrying arms and going to the bush? What's the opportunity cost? So if you know that what you will be losing going to the bush is actually going to be higher than what you will gain going to the bush, your rational choice is that you are not going to go to the bush. And then so when you go to the bush, and you begin you carry arm, then you begin to know, what do you gain from it? The gain can be multiple fold. It could be immediate economic benefit. It could be influence. It could be power that you enjoy. Look, some of these young 21, 22 Fulani boys in Zamfara, they're like kings in that small hut. People present wives to them. You know, you do. Those things are there. So that's the great dimension. You can rate villages. You get any kind of woman that you like. And I'm emphasizing this because there's that gender dimension of it that sometimes we don't talk about. So you get anything you need. You rate the village. You can put villagers together and ask them to farm for you. Where you are harvesting, they are not able to harvest their own. You tax them. You compare them to bring all those monies and order. So by the time you look at the opportunity cost, you find out that there's more benefit being in it than actually not being out of it. But for them to also be able to do that in making that rational choice, there must be opportunity. So one is that they're in areas that are alternatively governed, what colleagues here refer to an ungoverned space. It gives them safety. They are rough terrain. It's not easy for the police to actually go to those places, whether they are forests or they are mountains and all that. And then there are people who are ready to collect stipends from them and share intelligence with them and all those things. So these three drives it. So you have to think about the grievances. You think about the greed, which is the economic dimensions of it. And then you think about the opportunities, because even if they are greedy, they must be able to find the opportunity to actually do it. And then when in part of the opportunity is that you also look at, can I sustain it? Is there any risks involved? When the risk becomes also minimal, you remain and you sustain. So if we have to deal with this issue, it's for us to appreciate this trend and that no one violent conflicts happen and remain the same. It morphed. It morphed, but we don't morph in our interpretation. An intervention. But if you hold it this way, it changes. And I tell people, the people that are on Kaduna Road, stopping and raiding people, they are not bandits. In that classical conception of bandit, they are not the same as the one in Zamfara. But the one in Zamfara may actually be that he just become an apprentice. He served in a particular group, and then he was able to get an arm and decided to leave and move to another place and carry out crime of a different dimension. But we didn't shift in our interpretation. So the ones on Kaduna Road are probably very different from the ones that are terrorists from Abuja suburbs. So you must be able to find this kind of capacity for disaggregations and understanding. That's why we have the, I don't know whether we still have that. Okay, well, we used to have crime analysts in the police force. Yeah, that's their job. It is to analyze. They get data, like this data you are putting together, they analyze, and they're able to define based on their respective characteristics, but on recognition that they can be very amoebic. It changes in forms and dimension based on context, geography, and all that. So for me, if we talk about courtesan, this is the kind of things we're seeing. I don't really think that the courtesan that we used to have in our universities is exactly what we are dealing with in other clients. It's not the same. It's totally different. So I think this is what we need to be doing. This is what probably next year need to support beyond we having this brilliant data. And thank you, I will come and harvest part of it. But we should also help in doing this kind of analysis and disaggregations for people to actually understand. But using one brush to talk about every crisis, for me, it doesn't talk to the issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, one thing coming out for me is that it seems we tend to generalize, have one defined understanding of what we feel, or maybe media will come up with a name and all of us, will swell in that direction. Thank you so much for that. But before I get to the audience, I have just one question for you, Dr. Abdul. You double as IGA Africa board chairman. Yes. And then we have election coming up. Then we have these security issues on governed spaces, threats to public life and safety. So I don't know, what worries you more?
I'm not too worried about the elections. I know that the political class is really, really very interested in elections, and they have always found ways to cope, even under this kind of difficult context. In the last week, since the Boko Haram crisis broke out, we've had the next election is going to be the third in the cycle of elections. And yet we are able to have election in Borno. Don't ask me how we manage to do it, but we are able to get sometimes up to close to 1 million votes from Borno State. Yes, we knew that in the Northwest, there are communities that at the moment are not accessible. And it is clear that we may not be able to operate in or have proper election in those places. At the moment, there is no framework for IDP voting. I don't know, I think I know INEC is working on something like that. What the framework that INEC has cannot operate under the new Electoral Act, and therefore INEC is probably working on the new framework that we conform with the new Electoral Act to see how IDPs can actually be allowed to vote. I don't know, I don't have the details of that, but I knew that when it comes to elections, the ruling class is really, really very interested, and they always do everything possible in ensuring that it holds. But my fear for, particularly for maybe post this particular government, is that just like the Boko Haram issue, we didn't understand much of it before the 2015 election. It hurt. The government of the day came with a particular perceptions and understanding of it, and still has to struggle with it. So election security is going to be a major issue. And what I tell people is that don't let anybody tell us that we are going to address the security problem. We want to tell us how you are going to address the security problem. It's very easy for you to just go and say, look, we sort out this problem. Anybody can say that, but tell us how you are going to solve the problem. And I think it's the how of it that Nigerians should be asking for, and how we are going to deal with it, because we can't continue like this. About 75 secondary schools have been closed down in Zamfara State at the moment. So, and similar number you could find in Kasena, in Sokoto, in Kebbi. So people are not going to school. Primary schools in many places have actually been closed down. Health facilities have totally collapsed because nobody is in those locations. And so the socio-economic crisis of the people that probably created the condition for this crisis we're experiencing is actually escalating. You get it? So it's escalating. So I'm just looking forward to who will tell me how we are going to solve this problem. Look at police, and I'd like to talk about this. We want to recruit. For how many years now? The police have not been able to recruit because they cannot agree between the police and the police service and the police service commission on who is responsible for recruiting constables. I've never seen this kind of thing where a governing body is insisting on taking the responsibility for recruitment, not of a manager cadre. It's unheard of. As a governing body, even if you have to recruit, you recruit for a manager's cadre. But when it comes to the day-to-day, next year, I'm sure next year has a board. So next year is going to recruit staff. And then the board says, no, management, you cannot recruit. We will do the recruiting. And then we are dealing with a major security issue like this one, and we are struggling because people cannot agree on the basic thing. And then you also have a country leadership that cannot stamp its feet and say, I want this done in this particular manner, because it doesn't take decisions. So otherwise, because this is how you address those kind of things. And then you say, hold on, guys, what is going on? I've never had this kind of thing before. Please, you go ahead and do the recruitment. So we can't. The number is low. Our armed forces, we don't actually have the number. And we are dealing with big situations like this. I worry about the cost of defense expenditure. I worry about it because I also know the relationship. I used to teach defense expenditure. at the Defense Academy. It's one of my key areas. And I know how deep the relationship between defense expenditure and corruption all over the world, because it has limited transparency. And the kind of resources we're investing in a poor country, we can celebrate. I see all the celebration around the kind of arms we have procured over the last few years. But as a development person, what comes to my mind, I say, is look, I wish this money was invested into our health services or invested in education and all that, and probably it would have been a different thing entirely. So I worry about our defense expenditure as it's escalating just to address internal security problems. And the problem that we actually know that can actually be non-kinetically managed if we take the right decision at the right time. I think for me, these are some of the challenges. For elections, I don't have much fear. Yes, it's going to be a problem, but I think it will still hold.
All right, that's good to know. And then that conversation about security sector reform is something we still need to, keep talking about. Governance, not just a reform, but governance of the security sector space as well. Thank you. So I don't know, questions, comments, feedbacks. Okay.
Sorry, let me take the first one. My name is Ndu Nwokolo, I'm a partner with Nextier. So last week or 2 weeks ago or so, I got so frustrated. I went back and started reading Hamza Alavi's Overdeveloped State, 1972, the classical theory. And while reading it, the issue of the bureaucracy, the gap between the state and the society came into my head. And I kept asking the question. So I'm not sure who will take this question, but I'll throw it open. One, do we think that if we have a society that has closed up in such a way that what borders one part of the country borders the other, probably won't be where we are today? For instance, when the issue of the Niger Delta crisis started, if we had a country where some people were like, no, the Nigeria state, you need to give these guys what belongs to them, or not thinking it's not our issue, probably by now we won't be losing the 800,000 barrels of oil that we're losing every day. When the issue in the Northeast started, people in the South felt it's not going to get to us. I live in Banana Island, so what's my problem? But now I think they reach us to cry in Lagos. So because it's everywhere. So my thinking is there any way that we start deconstructing the Nigerian state and reconstructing it in such a way that we start feeling that we are one? And it will help us to start dealing with this issue. Because now you can't travel, if you want to travel using any other means apart from flying, you have two things. It's either you get home or you calculate your kidnapping value and keep the money for your family to come and bail you out. So these are the things we need to start looking at. How do we start dealing with this? Especially those of us who understand what is happening. What should be our contribution to start solving the problem of, because Dr. Chogo talked about elite consensus. Do you think if we have that, we should be where we are today? Because they should be the one pulling the other part of the society to where we want to be, to know that what is affecting Anambra State, if we don't deal with it, can as well affect Zamfara State. Yeah. And probably that's where we are. Let me stop here and allow you to deal with it.
Take all the questions.
Oh, good evening. Henry Major, just by way of contribution, I just want to say something about the problem, security issues in the country. We all know the problem, but we have not accepted how to solve that problem. Because in the whole issue of problem, there's no justice. And without justification, there can never be peace. No accountability. So we need the political will to solve this problem. If the political will is there, because we understand we have the solution, but the will is not there to solve it. And also, you talk about...
Sorry, can we just take one so that we can, another person?
Okay.
We really don't have time. Thank
you.
Okay,
good evening, everyone. My name is Shama Balami. I work with Yaga Africa. I want to commend Nextier for putting up the database. We have seen in the presentation the number of attacks across geopolitical zones and states, and also the casualties. But do we have disaggregate data for internally displaced across both the state and also the geopolitical zones? Because if we have that, it will actually, if fully utilized, help in time of policy formulation for government policy makers, and also in time of programming for non-government actors, to really, really go a long way. Now, my question cut across both topics from the first panelist and this one. Now, we have talked about securing security, stability, and securing public space. So my question is in relation with elections, even though Dr. have actually talked about it. Now, the first panelists talk about non-combative approach and handling the issue of banditry and terrorism. Now, as much as we can say the combative approach is yielding much desired outcome or result, but if we fully adopt the non-combative approach, looking at the fact that, based of my knowledge, okay, the terrorist groups, the banditry groups, they, to some extent, we have a lot of factions, we have a lot of groups, and they don't have a defined demand. They don't have a defined need. So how do we think the non-combative approach will be more effective and efficient in securing these areas that have been taken over?
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Brian Odige. Work with ECOWAS. I think thank you for the intervention so far. I mean, interaction so far. Dr. Abdul, I'm quite interested when you talk about the regional context, of what is happening in Nigeria. So when you look at the Sahel, and it's a similar thing when you go, whether Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and there seems to be something happening around this region. So in your engagement, what will you look at in terms of regional approach to even solving? While we are looking at contextual aspect of it as it relates to Nigeria, I believe there's supposed to also be some larger picture of regional approach to it. So what will be your specific area about that?
You'll be the last person. Oh. Okay, just five seconds so that I'll take from here and then close.
Well,
Thank you.
I'm Femi Ibrahim. I probably one of the first to do a graduate work on on terrorism, Boko Haram specifically. And I think we've had two long conversations over how to classify some of these groups. Terrorism is quite different from the so-called banditry, just as Comrade Abdul well said. And covered that most people who had no knowledge and has probably, have no reason to get involved in discussing about conflicts at different points in time to get involved. And I think this is one of our major problems we are having. And our brother here, the chief, succinctly say something about it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. The last person.
Thank you again for the opportunity. I still remain Godwin Okoko. And it's interesting listening to you, Dr. Osenia and Dr. Joseph, each time on such kind of platforms. My question is, what do we think then is the rule of, what do we think is the rule of law in terms of all this we're talking about? Because we're talking about securing stability in our security system as well as public spaces. What is the role of the law in it? One, how do we deal with increasing impunity across all broad? Two, what can we do to address also issues around community weak social structures? Looking at that, at the moment in our country, everything is viewed from the lenses of ethnicity and religion in most cases. How do we deal with this? Because I also think that even at the level of development workers, there are times that our biases speaks out too. What role also can do no harm play in all those things that we're talking about, especially around our programming interventions across communities? I certainly will not hand over the mic without saying thank you to Nextier for this platform.
Thank you for coming. Okay, we have another person.
Thank you very much. The issues that Dr. Ndubisi raised drew my attention. Sorry, my name is Njoku Godin. The issues that Dr. Ndubisi raised drew my attention to Nigerian diversity, which has not been fully explored in the security institutions in Nigeria. If you look at the leadership of a security institution in Nigeria, you see a security officer who's been appointed in the Northeast. Maybe that person is from that particular place. How do you expect that person to perform very well? I mean, Professor Mokalu once said in Chinese TV that you don't deploy a particular officer who is from the Northeast to handle the issues in the Northeast. It's not possible. Why don't you send somebody from other regions? So I'm thinking of the diversity of Nigerians. We're not really exploring it at all. So those issues need to be exploited.
Thank you. Dr. We are running out of time. Peter, just
okay, very well. I think I was just whispering here to Joseph here that how do we manage that in relations to those of us asking that we have state police, and therefore you are still going to recruit people from that state to manage the security in that state. So I don't really think that that is any much an issue. It's my personal opinion, by the way. Regional approach. I absolutely agree with you that we need a regional approach to some of the crises we're dealing with, particularly the one that manifests from the Sahel region. We've had the president talk very well most often around having a regional approach to it. But for what constitutes a regional approach to him, for me, is what we need to check. One, good neighborliness is very important, no doubt about it. And this is one of our biggest influence in the past. Of course, I know that there are scholars who have interrogated that and are questioning it, Africa being the centerpiece of Nigerian foreign policy. And the scholars are lately asking questions, what have we gained from Africa being the centerpiece of our foreign policy, particularly learning from Nigeria's experience in Liberia and the experience in Sierra Leone, where we invested life and resources in it. And eventually we were chased out of that, practically chased out of these two countries at the end of the war. So people begin to raise those questions. But I think that it's just that we have not been strategic about it. And then we have been also very apologetic about our size and that and our influence. And therefore, what we need to talk about, we don't get to talk about it because we don't want to be seen as regional bullies and all that. And foreign policy is politics. And it's also like national politics. It's not any much different. It's just politics at an international level. So I think we are just not understanding that. If you take, for instance, the report of Daily Trust report on Saturday, talking about ECOWAS and the human resource in ECOWAS, and despite Nigeria's contribution, the only number of staff that Nigeria actually have in ECOWAS, the secretariat is here, you contribute more than 50% of everything in that place, but yet you don't find Nigerians in that work stream. But Nigeria decided to have, it has a very shy approach to those kind of conversations, and it does not work. And by the time South Africa became more democratic and out of the apartheid rule, and the influence of South Africa began to come to bear, Nigeria couldn't fight much around it. But we are also, at the time that South Africa is also in a very big crisis, and its influence within the region is waning. The region, West Africa, or Africa generally, is left without any kind of leadership. And that's what we are seeing even within West Africa. Nigeria's leadership is not that much showing. So what we need to do is to actually build on our capacity. Look, 50%, about 55% of West African economy is here. We control about 55% of the GDP. Half of the West African population is actually here in Nigeria. And therefore, you need to engage. We need to use that, build that friendly neighborliness. And then secondly, for me, is we need to control arms. And if we have to control arms, it actually means we have to support the country, because the dynamics of Nigerian border is that we are bordered by relatively poor countries.
I'm sorry, is it possible?
Yeah, so relatively poor countries. You take Niger, for instance, you take Chad. The closest is, or in terms of economic resources, is Cameroon. But take Benin Republic, take Niger, take Chad. So they are relatively poor countries with wide space of border that they actually don't have the resources to manage. How do Nigeria support in dealing with those kind of things? How do we have a regional approach to deal with this? For me, will be key. And lastly, rule of law. I know, yeah, there is a role for law, but again, we also need to be careful that we don't legislate on everything. And this is the problem of this country. We want to legislate on everything. If it's not a law, then it is not acceptable. And so, but you can have legitimacy for something without being a law. Thank you.
For you to comment. Please, someone wants to leave and a car is blocking him. Sorry, 1 minute. The plate number of the car is a Lexus. The plate number is ABC 387. Please, you need to repark so that the person can move out. Lexus ABC 387. Thank you. ABC, not APC. Thank you, Dr. Chefu. Just your honor.
Okay, I think just to start with Wokolo's refreshing thesis on the developed state. I think it's either by Colin Les or Hamza Lavi. I think it's Colin Les. It's Hamza Lavi, okay, on the overdeveloped state. I think the truth of the matter is that, yeah. So I think the major problem is the fact that it's still this lack of elite consensus that we are talking about. If you have a country like Nigeria, big, large, enormous resources, human and material resources, you need the right elite, you know, to actually lead the people. So, and then for them to have a common consensus and agree, you know, on the regional specificity, you know, and how we can improve on this diversity and to lead, you know, lead Africa and lead the best we can do and leverage on it. So I think elite consensus is very, very important, you know, in this kind of situation. The person that talked about data on IDP, I don't know, but you can check the IOM data displacement matrix, you know, in the IOM website to see if you can get the internal IDP displacement data on it. Dr. Hussein has talked about regional approach, so I won't go there. On the issue of rule of law is very, very important. I think that there are two ways this can work. One, for rule of law, there needs to be an internal framework and mechanism within the various institutions and how they operate. For some of us who work in the public sector, we know that there is gross deficit in terms of even internal accountability, even among colleagues, not to talk of external stakeholders, you know, in terms of operations and all that. So perhaps we can build an internal working mechanism in these institutions to ensure that they do what they need to do, you know, and then society too can hold them to account. I think that there are several innovations in terms of service, what they call the Savicom, the anti-corruption unit, and the Freedom of Information Bill, and some certain mechanisms that actually been put in place, you know, that needs to be operated within the ministries, department, and agencies to get them to function and account. Another component again is to see how, finally, okay, I think weak community structures. There is no doubt that these communities will have very weak community structure. In short, you need to go to rural areas and discover that we actually have big problem. In my place, once they kill somebody, the tendency is to say Fulani have done it. But by the time you investigate, you discover that these are local boys, you know, criminals, you know, who are doing certain things, you know, and all that. I think that to end my final intervention is that we are dealing with actors, you know, who are very innovative and creative, you know, in terms of their criminality and how they perpetrate violence on us. So as both state and non-state actors, we need to be creative. You know, we need to be innovative. We need to be flexible and adaptable, you know, in terms of how we respond and deal with these threats. I think to finally just thank Nexpedia SPD and Nextier as well, you know, for putting this together. Thank you so much.
Sorry, if I can respond to what you said. I know we're out of time, but basically, why we have this gathering is, you know, he mentioned something, people being in the space who are not supposed to be in the space, given narrative that we should be, you know, that should come from us. So part of why we are doing this is to hear from those who have been doing work in this space. We can't have people who are outside the space drawing the narrative, building consensus that shouldn't be what it should be. So thank you so much, all of you, for coming. And thank you to my wonderful panelists, Dr. Seni and Dr. Chubu. Thank you.
Another round of applause as they make their way back to the audience. Quite an interesting animated conversation so far. Ladies and gentlemen, want to thank you for your candor. Thank you for your patience and interventions. The reports will be shared to you with you in the coming days. If you dropped your email address, we also do well to add you to our mailing list where you'll be getting our reports on different crisis types in Nigeria. We mostly publish daily, weekly, and monthly thought pieces on a broad range of armed conflict and security issues in Nigeria. So please do well to join our mailing list. You can also follow us on Facebook, you can follow us on LinkedIn, you can follow us on Twitter to keep up with our activities. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause as I call Mr. Charles Achodo to give the closing remarks. Mr. Achodo is a director at Nextier. Please, a round of applause.
Sorry, I'm supposed to just say thank you for your participation. It's been a very robust engagement from all the panelists and also from those who are watching and participating online. So we just want to say thank you. Usually when I'm invited to a retreat, I used to get excited, but later on it starts getting boring. Then later on it starts getting interesting when I found out that the most important thing in a retreat is the last 3 letters in retreat. So that became very interesting. And that was those 3 letters are IT. But then now on this particular platform, we didn't have that. This is a serious engagement, serious contribution, and very, very extensive recommendations were made. And I want to use this opportunity to say thank you very much. Thank you.